Andrews, who is the acting chair of the Department of Health, Aging and Society, to introduce Dr. Zhou. So Gavin, thank you very much. Take it away.
Thank you. So it's really great to have Rachel presenting today. She's been fully in our department now for 2 years, and what a great addition. She's a great scholar, and her research really contributes to our departmental research and teaching. But Rachel has actually been in the university for over 10 years now in the Faculty of Social Science. She's currently a professor, of course, in the Department of Health, Aging and Society. She was formerly in social work, and she's also in the Institute on Globalization in the Human Condition. She's published over 40 scholarly articles, including in journals like Globalization, Social Science and Medicine, Health, the International Journal, Time and Society, and Global Social Policy. She's the lead editor of Sexualities, Transnationalism and Globalization, New Perspectives, so that's published by Routledge this year, actually, and the lead editor of a theme symposium on transnationalism, sexuality, and HIV risk, published in Culture, Health and Sexuality in 2017. She's also the editor of 2 other books published by Routledge in 2016 and 2017, and a special issue of Time Globalization in the Journal Globalizations. It's an honor to have her presenting in this year's HAS Talks, and it makes a great contribution to this seminar series, which is going from strength to strength. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Gavin, for your nice introduction, and thank you everyone for being here. And also thank you for Alyssa and Peter to make this possible. Of course, thank you, Has, for the invitation. I'm going to start my presentation by sharing screen first. Okay, can you see the screen? Sip and sound?
We can, yes.
Okay, so as you can see, I don't know why I cannot make this this part disappeared, the small screen part. Okay, maybe just make it, okay, better. Oh, sorry, please bear with me. Okay, better. So as you can see from my first slide, when we're talking about vaccine nationalism, it's not only about the vaccine itself, it's also about a lot of things, including the politics of speed, the conflicts, and also the relationship with others. As this cartoon shows you, first of all, it's about the competition for the vaccine access. So this talk primarily informed by my recent publication in Globalizations, which is out in this August. Its title is Vaccine Nationalism, Contested Relationships Between COVID-19 and Globalization. This article actually is quite lengthy. It's 16 pages. I attended to a lot of related issues, including what globalization has things to do with the COVID-19 and what does COVID-19 means for the future of globalization. So if you are interested, you can go there to read more nuanced analysis. But this article, I'm really excited about it because it kind of reflects my attempt to engage this rapidly evolving field of scholarship. You may find even like when I submit a paper or when I preface the papers, a lot of facts has to be revised because the changes are so many and during such a short period of time. Partially, I think the first round or first wave of research publication are primarily done by epidemiologists or global public health scholars, but not yet by social scientists. So I kind of managed to chime in because I kind of wondering what can we as social scientists offer or contribute from an interdisciplinary perspective through a global lens. We know as social scientists that we are good at looking at a bigger picture that goes beyond the singular disciplinary or geographical perspectives. So again, on this slide, before my presentation, I want to share with you some of my kind of mind mapping when I hear the term vaccine nationalism. Of course, immediately I identify or conceptualize it as an issue of vaccine access, in particular extremely unequal access to limited supply, but also it's an issue about globalization. And one of my colleagues actually has an interesting chat with me. When she hear I conceptualize as an issue of globalization, she immediately said, is globalization still a thing? Which is a very interesting comment, because since the start of contemporary globalization process, more than 4 decades has passed, right? Everything in one way or another, we are living in this globalized world. Everything has been globalized. So therefore, when we're talking about globalization, we are more talking about approaches to some global problems such as COVID-19. And in this particular case, we look at the global health governance, including a lot of components, such as its major or less visible actors or players. And also, I'm pondering this as an issue of a global health crisis, because right now we get used to the word crisis because we are dealing with multiple accumulative crises in the past decades, right? So again, now the question kind of like make me think is what constitutes a crisis or the layers of crisis? Again, in this presentation, I'm going to touch upon some of them, not all of them, due to the time limit. So I want to look at this chart. It's basically show the pre-order of COVID-19 vaccine made by some countries by November 2020. This calculation is based on the doses, the number of doses per capita per person. So I want to ask you what comes to your mind when seeing this chart. So like for me, the first word come to my mind actually stockpiling, right? So we're kind of familiar with that phenomenon, right? Because we may done this with our toilet paper purchase more or less, right? Which as a behavior or psychological issue is kind of annoying, but it's not that bad because it's not life-threatening. Stockpiling toilet paper will not put people's life on the line, but the vaccine is different. For a disease like COVID-19, so stockpiling the vaccine could put some people in danger. And if you look at this chart, you will see the overrepresentation of a wealthy country. So this is something related to purchasing power. Of course, we do see some middle income countries here, but their doses per person is quite tiny. But Canada is here to, Canada basically kind of, stockpiled like 9 doses per person, even just in a late 2020. But again, with limited supply of the vaccine, those kind of a game is a little bit like zero-sum game, because if you get more, that means other country get none or less. So in a way, it is ethical issues that is very serious, have very severe consequences. So in this presentation, my focus will be vaccine nationalism. And to unfold this phenomenon, I will touch upon COVID-19 vaccines, including its own development process and the global race. And then I will touch upon COVAX, which is multilateral kind of platform to facilitate equitable access to COVID-19 vaccine at a global level, which also is designed to mitigate the consequences of vaccine nationalism. So, and my second part of the presentation is I'm going to touch upon several ideas that entrenched in this phenomenon, including interconnections, acceleration, and the contestations. So far, so good? Okay, so first, vaccine nationalism. Here, I really carefully put a quotation marks here, because that is the word used in the research literatures. Like my other colleagues in globalization studies, they will immediately say, this word is not so good. Maybe this better word would be vaccine imperialism. basically they saw a larger picture here than something related or grounded on nation states, which is true. But just for the sake of service and debate, we're just going to use this concept. So basically, vaccinationalism refers to the mindset and act to monopolize or gain preferential access to the newly developed vaccines by individual countries. So in practice, by wealthy countries. So this is done through the bilateral pre-production agreements between national governments and one or more pharmaceutical corporations for the later stage development and production of leading vaccine candidates, even before it's gained approval, regulatory approval. So the conflicts between the limited global manufacturing capacity and the simultaneous needs for access to vaccine actually generated a question immediately about health inequities and ethics, and also potential for viral mutations. And in the end, the possibility for us to move forward a post-pandemic world, and so on and so forth. Here, I want to mention that vaccine nationalism actually is nothing new. It's happened more than 10 years ago during the 2009 H1N1 pandemic. So at the time, including Canada, a bunch of wealthy countries did exactly the same thing. They made a massive pre-order on those vaccines. And also upon the WHO's plea, they agreed to donate some to the WHO if the pandemic first wave has passed, there's no further wave coming up. But again, no, H1N1's quick win made this have never get a chance to test its effect. But right now, this effect is being tested. So of course, one of the severe consequences of vaccine nationalism is the vaccine inequity. Here, as you can see from the screen, as of the last week of January 2021, those rich countries, which only counts on 14% of the world's population, has stockpiled more than half of the best vaccinations. So, but at the same time, only 25 vaccine doses have been administered in the whole of sub-Saharan Africa, the poorest region in the world. So this world has so many layers, right? It also shows you the dire picture of the inequity. You feel like, oh my God, how could that possible? So this slide, we're going to take a step back just to get a sense about, something related to COVID-19 vaccines. So we can know even the politics starts before the vaccine nationalism. So vaccine R&D, research and development has been historically underfunded areas. If we look at, give you an example, WHO's 2016 R&D blueprint illustrated or points out that coronaviruses were listed as their top emerging pathogens likely to cause severe outbreaks in the near future. But yet, by now, there is no fully developed, tested, and proved SARS vaccine yet, because SARS is also caused by coronavirus. So again, to make the pharmaceutical corporations to have incentive to accelerate the vaccine research and development, it requires a lot of money, primarily through the government's direct financing or use those advanced market commitments, such as the pre-production agreements that we are talking about to give them incentive. So like in the case of COVID-19, very early on, the United States government has launched something called the Operation Warp Speed and invested billions of dollars in those big pharmaceutical corporations. So which of course will give them motive to quickly carry on the vaccine research and development. But after, but even before the in the process, vaccine development has been a global race, in part because unlike other infectious disease, COVID-19 has equally affected wealthy countries, the major emerging economies, and of course the rest of the world. So on the other hand, the market is quite big. So as a result, we witnessed unprecedented speed of vaccine development. Usually this process will take on average 10 to 15 years, but in this case, only take 11 months. So by the end of 2020, the US has approved the vaccine from the Pfizer and the Moderna, and China has five candidates on the last stage trial. And even before that, Russia has approved its own vaccine. It's called Sputnik 5. But again, this race is not only about the technology advance. From the very beginning, it is about geopolitical politicians. And we can clearly see the broad logic of the Cold War there. So for example, the Russians vaccine is named in contribute to the Soviet Union's first artificial space satellite in 1957 and during the Cold War. So from these cartoons, you can see vaccine development here is definitely not only about biomedicine or technology, but everything is about geopolitics. It's about global competition. But again, those cartoons are not only produced in North America. For example, this one, Just Like That, is published by the Times of India. So again, different parts of the world has their own interpretation and also observation of this global race of vaccine. So again, those geopolitical competition does have impacts on the global reach of vaccines. Right now, if you look at here, the vaccines has greater global reach happen to be those produced by the powerful countries or players. So far, WHO has approved 7 vaccines, including 2 produced by China. And the Sputnik 5 actually has not been approved yet by now. So, sorry. So on this slide, I'm talking about the COVAX. COVAX is COVID-19 vaccine global access, which is a vaccine pillar of the access to COVID-19 to accelerator. This facility or platform or mechanism is co-led by WHO and CEPI. The full name is Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, and Gavi, the Global Vaccine Alliance. So actually this was launched in June 2020. In the same month, the United States decided to withdraw from the WHO. So those 3 major players respectively are playing those separate but supplementary roles. With WHO oversees policy and allocation, and CEPI is in charge of development and manufacturing, and Gavi is in charge of the procurement and delivery. Here I want to mention the UNICEF. UNICEF is the key delivery partner of this initiative. UNICEF actually over decades has established this global network of partnership to deliver vaccines for children around the world. So actually its expertise play a huge and very successful roles in the project. So in essence, COVAX is a globalist, multilateral, but time-limited platform to accelerate equitable vaccine access. So its participants are divided into two groups, including 19 funded, middle income, and it's a middle lower income countries and a lower income country. Another group is self-financing higher income countries and upper middle income countries. So, but again, the powerful players' participation in this initiative is kind of uneven. And some players were very hesitant at the beginning. For example, European Union and also China kind of participated only a couple of months after the initiative was launched. And Russia has not participated. And Biden promised to participate after his administration started. So this system was portrayed as a system of resources pooling, because by getting all countries' participation, so the WHO is possible to use these resources to negotiate lower price with the pharmaceutical corporation. But for wealthy country, this platform is particularly portrayed as a risk diversification system. So just in case they could not be successful to secure vaccines through the bilateral agreements, and then this could be one way for them to secure the supply. So its goal at the end of 2021 is to cover up to 20% of the population in those countries. But so far, this goal is not very promising. One of the reasons is because of the funding gaps. So I know this slides, including a lot of information, could be a little bit boring, but it's important to understand how this structure is kind of designed. So COVAX use a two-phase allocation mechanism. So the first phase is the proportional approach. So basically each country get up to 20% of their population size to cover in terms of coverage. But after phase 1 is completed, the approach will be more responsive to the needs of the individual countries, such as disease burden, their weak healthcare system, and so on and so forth. So in a way, it will be more sensitive to the needs of poor countries. So, but of course, this were viewed as the ethically problematic, because wealthy country has multiple access to vaccines through different routes, but those poor countries they don't have other possibilities. They were heavily count on COVAX to access vaccination. And also another critique about COVAX is viewed as a win-win situation for pharmaceutical corporations, because there's less strings attached to those corporations. So they in this, according to this platform, they have little to lose. So this picture show you the waiting games of those countries despite the creation of COVAX. If you saw those blue colored parts, there are primarily, especially dark blue. Of course, this picture is projected kind of information, but those blue or dark blue are primarily those wealthy countries, and most of them have secured vaccine through the Vaccinationalism in addition to COVAX. But if you saw those kind of red pinkish parts, they are primarily lower income countries, which they will be able to kind of achieve their goal, get this kind of a widespread vaccination until 2023. So this is projected picture, but this is actual picture. So if you look at this actual picture in terms of the fully vaccinated population statistics, you may find it's pretty much consistent with the projection, but you will find China actually is a little bit kind of different from projection. As you can see here, right, it's expected they were going to wait time until late 2022, but here actually by this September, their fully vaccinated rate has reached 71%, which is actually very interesting for a lot of globalization scholars, even for me writing that papers. When it went to blind review process, and actually 2 comments from different reviewer actually comments on China said, because I portray China as the leader of a southern country or southern country, global south, right? So, but they said, are you sure China is a southern country? But again, in that article, I took a lot of things between the tension, took a lot of things about the tension between United States and China, because which is part of the vaccine games and politics, right? So, but China, it is a very interesting country because it actually, even before, like by 2010, it had become the 2nd largest world economy. Even before that, it became the largest US debt holder. And right now, China is upper middle income countries, but a decade ago, it's a lower income countries. So the dramatic change, economic changes actually in China changed our projection, our imagination of about the global health governance actually. So in a way, again, I don't have like time to cover the story around China and the tension between those 2 superpowers, but in my articles, I actually talk a lot of things about it. If you're interested, you could get more information there. So from here, I'm going to talk about some ideas or the thematic dimension around the vaccine nationalism. First is acceleration. But acceleration is not only about speed. Of course, we know acceleration is something characterized kind of or characteristic of the contemporary globalization process, right? But in this particular case, we observe the important role of the market forces, right? Because without monies, it is almost impossible to accelerate it. When we're talking about vaccine rollout, development, and so on, we always talk about investment, donors, and public-private partnerships and the global supply chains. Everything is related to market forces. Even though we are praising WHO and UNICEF for their quick action, but that is just one layer of the story. But when they get vaccines on the ground, they encounter a lot of barriers, right? For WHO, the huge, we're talking about billions of dollars funding gaps, it's one of the major barriers. And again, when we go to the lower income countries, lack of infrastructure for the feeds, for the storage, for the transportation, for the labbing capacity and the manufacturing capacity, all those are the big barriers there. And also like COVAX heavily counts on the Serum Institute of India, the largest world vaccine manufacturing for the vaccine for the vaccine, but there was a major delay because of the 2nd wave caused by Delta variant in India. So of course there have been those huge demand for supply at the same time, and also delayed their production because this particular place was the manufacturing was like licensed to produce AstraZeneca. So we just talk about all those layers added to there. So speed is not just like straightforward. On the one level, it is very fast, but there are so many levels cannot kind of live up to that kind of speed required to respond to the simultaneity of the global health crisis. Again, no, not only different countries have different capacity to accelerate. as we mentioned, because this is more kind of like a zero-sum games, some countries are actually forced to decelerate because they have to wait, right, until supply kind of satisfy the needs of some wealthy countries. So in the end, we also see the linked temporality or linked time, because if with the delay of with the delayed access to the vaccines, that would be in some lower income country, we will witness a vicious circle of widespread transmission, the collapse of healthcare systems, and humanitarian crisis, which will continue to threaten the entire global population, and in the end will prolong the pandemic. Right, in the North American, we talk about we started seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, but we forgot to talk about in the globalized world, all those tunnels actually are linked together unless we can completely shut down the borders, which is impossible because most of the things we consume on a daily basis are actually produced in the global south, right? So again, I think the phenomena of vaccinationalism also show us the contestations at so many levels. Here, I will just give you some examples too. So first, at the WHO level, WHO has become a new site of global competition and contestations. This is partially related to its own funding structures. Like WHO's funding is come from two major sources. One is the so-called assessed contribution of member states, but another one is voluntary contributions from the donors. But if we look at the trend, actually WHO has been increasingly rely on the latter, which is the donors' money. In 2014 to 2015, this source of funding and counts to 80%. So basically, you're facing a picture, those leading players' budget is dictated by the external donors. Of course, they're going to have some influence on its priorities, activities, mandates, and so on and so forth, right? So, and another thing is you will find the growing political and economic divide will also reflect at the WHO's, for example, the withdrawal of the United States, and also China has a lot of roles to play there, right? And also EU kind of like embraced the WHO after the COVID-19 too. So let's just talk about it is a side of geopolitics. And also another layer of contestation is right now, we witness the coexisting of two-tiered system of vaccine access, that is the vaccinationalism, and versus this multilateral covacs as a global mechanism, right? So they coexist, but they not they are only coexist. It's rather the national vaccine nationalism is going to undercut WHO's system. They're not just peacefully coexistence, right? And it is likely this system is going to continue to exist after this pandemic. So this is going to generate a lot of issue when it comes to equity, file, or equitable access to vaccination and other things. So another layer is what is happening right now with the vaccinationalism actually deeply challenge the broader systematic goals of global public health. So basically, they put the immediate national interest over the logics of global health that require global collaboration. And also during, in this phenomena, we can clearly see the proliferation of public-private partnerships. This has been a trend in global health governance and also in many other fields too, right? Because it's basically illustrates that private solutions and interests or the market mechanism are generated privileged, are generally privileged over public approaches and constitute a further deepening of the neoliberal management of global health crisis. And also we can say during this like vaccine responses, we can say some nation states, especially powerful nation states, become the major decision makers for this, like when it comes to crisis response, when it comes to access to vaccines, border controls, all those things. So in a way, it's kind of renaturalized the nation states in a globalized world, which may create a lot of barriers for us to collaborate when the other global crisis arrives. So the last idea I want to show is about the interconnections. So as Ulrich Beck argued that, modernity itself has created a world of uncontrollable risk and potential catastrophes, such as, financial crisis, terrorism, ecological crisis, which neither respect the state boundaries nor are clearly tied to one actor or sources, right? So basically we're linked. And also we observed the links between the vaccinated and unvaccinated. Right now, what happened in the United States and in the UK. So basically some researchers will call it as pandemic of the unvaccinated. So those kind of linkage observed in both national context and very soon going to be also on a global level in a global context too. But again, despite this interconnected risk and vulnerability, we can clearly also see a lack of or a lag in the global consciousness, especially in non-economic spheres, right? Even though on the one hand, we understand that we are as strong as the weakest link when it comes to global contagion. But on the other hand, you can clearly see those kind of me-first approaches and the basically absence of political feeling toward words, toward others. And I can give you more examples later on if we have time. But right now, I will move to the another layers, talk about, even though, WHO, they are facing at a WHO level, facing recurring problem at its own supranational level, but there is a lack of permanent structures or long-term solutions because COVAX is time-limited platform, right? Since the SARS, the WHO has declared 6 public health emergency of international concerns. So, and COVID-19 just one of them, but yet there is no permanent structure to deal with the problem like this. So we just talk about how yearly prepared is even at WHO levels. Of course, it has a lot of reasons. And also one tension we can, like interconnection that with a little bit hope is talking about transnational activism of intellectual property rights. So I think last year, maybe around last year, the India and the South Africa kind of submit the proposal to World Trade Organization to request to temporarily waive the IP rights, but it was rejected by the wealthy countries. So during the second wave of the Indian this year, they revised the proposal, they submit that again, and actually get increasing support from the developing countries, NGOs, corporations, surprisingly including the United States and the EU. So in a way, it is hopeful, even though it's time-consuming process, and also there's other issues such as whether developing country has that manufacturing capacity, even with the IP waiver. But again, I'll just talk about, transnational connection when it comes to activism is something we should pay attention to. And also we should pay attention to those less visible players, in addition to corporations, pharmaceutical, manufacturing, or philanthropical foundations. Like Gates Foundation, you will find that its name is everywhere in every initiative we are talking about here. And it itself has more resources than WHO, right? So, but again, no, they're so visible, but there are less visible actors that are also important that we need to really pay attention to and to enable them to make a bigger, play a bigger roles. So I don't know, did I miss one page by accident? So I'm gonna move into the concluding remarks, but here I just want to show you a survey, just basically in the world, 1 in the 3 people who are surveyed, of course, want preferential access to COVID-19 vaccine. Just talk about how we lack of this global consciousness. So me first is not because nationalism or nationalist tendency, right? It is partially a kind of a human tendency. We do need a system to deal with it, and we do need to have a better awareness about the issue in terms of its interconnection. So I'm going to conclude here. So vaccine nationalism both illustrates and sharpens long-standing inequity in public health between higher and lower income countries. And I agree with the argument that the vaccine nationalism is a short-sighted, potentially risky, morally defensible, and practically inefficient approaches to global contagion. Basically, it's not a good approach, both ethically or practically. And also, we should not simplify vaccine nationalism as a subproduct of domestic nationalism or a form of national crisis management strategy, but we should see it as a mix of geopolitics, international economic inequities, global capitalism, and me first politics. And also, I think last conclusion is we really need to learn something from this crisis. Because when we're talking about crisis, as if we're only talking about disease itself, but also our approach sometimes is integral to the crisis and sometimes reinforce the crisis. And we have so many common threats or crises to come that will threaten humanity's future. So therefore, the transplanetary solidarity is something we really should work on. And I'm going to stop here to say if any of you have any questions, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Rachel. That was great. We're giving you a virtual clap now. I'm going to hand you over to Peter, who's going to organize the questions.
Indeed. I don't know if anybody's had the displeasure, I guess, of hearing what a round of applause sounds like from different audio sources on Zoom, but it's really painful. So I hope Rachel can appreciate our virtual applause nonetheless. So I just, again, reiterating Gavin's words, I'd like to thank you very much, Dr. Zhu, for your presentation. I think I can speak for most of us where, you know, as vaccine rollout has advanced, this has certainly become an issue of increasing importance. And I, for one, really appreciate you walking us through this topic so systematically and comprehensively, especially given the fact that you only had 50 minutes. So thank you very much for that. At this time, I would like to invite anyone with questions or comments for discussion to feel free to perhaps raise your hand, or if you would like to post in the chat your question, or just let it be known that you have a question, I'd be happy to call on you to share your thoughts, either in the form of a chat message, or you can feel free to unmute. There's a lot to think about, no doubt. So while things, while folks are thinking about their questions, oh, Gavin, go ahead, Gavin.
Yeah, there was so much to take from your presentation, and so I just want to focus on one thing. I mean, I think you really showed the potential for what I, as a geographer, think about knock-on geographical impacts. We have unequal distribution of vaccines and vaccine access, for sure, and you showed that very well. But that's going to have a lasting impact on other equities as well, for instance, in global travel and global migration and even global trade, because there's going to be, in the future, no-go regions and non-acceptance of certain peoples from certain regions. And, why might this occur in the medium and long term? I think because we're not really talking about just 1 or 2 shots of the vaccine. In the longer term, we're talking about boosters, right? And consistent and differing types of boosters, perhaps over 10 years plus. So yeah, this is going to be something that has knock-on impacts and long-term impacts, and really, I think you set those kinds of debates and issues up very well. And I was wondering if you thought particularly about them.
So thanks you for the question. I actually am not quite sure. Like, what's the specific question? I agree with you, all you have said, but
yeah, it's rather just an observation, really, you know, and in terms of, you know, what kinds of issues your presentation signposts for the future. I was wondering if you thought about that longer term, what may happen over the next 10 years. You know, it's going to be endemic, and so these inequalities are going to have knock-on impacts for a long time.
Mm-hmm. That's actually really big question. I really want to open to the floor so everyone can contribute. But I think it's a great question, right? So even like through COVID-19, I feel like in my paper, I indeed argue that, you know, we should not understand the, you know, COVID-19 solely as an undesirable result of contemporary globalization processes. Actually, it is a moment to break or make the new direction of globalization. So in a way, because we observe a lot of kind of concerns during the process, in addition to inequity, you will also observe the bloc politics. And for example, right now, like there's a lot of things going on related to vaccine diplomacy, right? So the major countries are doing it, United States and China and Russia. And you will find that China also is doing a lot of things, right? Kind of doing vaccine related thing along with its road and belt initiative. You will find that the political scientists will be totally interested because they are kind of redoing the region, right? So not just based on geography, yeah, but based on the political alliance. Of course, vaccine become one of the things to make this happening. So again, I think your question is so interesting, and I think it's kind of comprehensive impacts on the future course of globalization is yet to be seen. But definitely this is a moment, because when we say this is a global health crisis, it's not only global health crisis, right? We're actually seeing, you know, this humanitarian crisis and the economic crisis too a little bit, right? And so on. All those things are simultaneously happen, not just the COVID simultaneously happen, the crisis are simultaneously happen, and they could reinforce each other. So, but yeah, we have this kind of absence of or lack in global awareness. One thing actually I mentioned earlier, but I don't have time to say is, some of you may heard the Global Public Health Intelligence Networks, which is a famous, like at a global level, which is Canada-based, the early warning system for pandemic and like a infectious disease. So it's like pride of Canadian kind of system, but it was turned off. It was deactivated a couple of months before COVID. And one of the debate is, we are using taxpayers' money in Canada to pay attention to something called global health. Are you kidding me? And then they turn it off. This is just one example, right? So, because we are still so self-centered, even though everything is linked with place and people and institution risk elsewhere. I'm not sure if I answered your question, Gavin, but yeah, it's a great question.
Oh, absolutely. Those are great thoughts. Thanks.
Wonderful. So we did receive a question in chat, which I'll quickly read out. And then I believe we had a hand up as well that I'll get to in just a second. So the question was from Fran Scott, and the question is, can we learn from history regarding vaccines? So in the case of smallpox, polio, H1N1, and so on.
Rachel, I'll just add to it. It's Fran here. It just seems to me that I don't recall the nationalism being anywhere near as strong, particularly around smallpox. Maybe starting to become in for polio and H1N1, and you mentioned H1N1, but is it the nationalism itself, not so much the particular vaccine, that has increased in the recent years?
Sorry, Rachel, you're on mute still.
This is an interesting question. I think I'm curious about that too, but I don't want to portray myself as an expert of vaccine or even the history of vaccines. But I do see something that we can learn from the past, right? When we're talking about the earlier kind of period, when it comes to vaccine, we kind of like, of course, it's always controversial when it comes to vaccine, right? Because there's always the hesitancy around it. But largely was portrayed as something associated with technology advance, is good for human well-beings. But also I think when it comes to vaccine access, there is kind of a tiered timeline. So for example, I think even some disease when we are here, it's not an issue anymore. But then like measles, right, in the past, it's not an issue in the developed countries. We don't talk about infectious disease that much, but it's primarily vaccines for developing country or the country in the South. But because of globalization, the complexity of things, actually a lot of infectious diseases we viewed as irrelevant become relevant, such as the measles outbreaks a couple of years ago in the United States and in different parts in Europe and so on and so forth, right? So again, I think vaccines is always useful, but again, when it comes to vaccine nationalism, as I mentioned, like even H1N1 already demonstrated that it's something related to the international economic inequity and also our kind of, I think this kind of political indifference to others. It's kind of me first politics. But even before that, some of you may remember H5N1 in 2005, when Indonesia refused to submit their viral sample to the WHO by citing viral sovereignty. So they basically said, okay, if we submit this viral sample to you, but we as a poor country don't have capacity, lab capacity or manufacturer capacity to produce a vaccine affordable for us. So what you can give us in return? So that is a moment actually is very interesting. Like as a kind of social science, I'm more interested in those kind of politics. So at the time that incident actually generated the debates at the WHO level regarding to how to share the benefits when it comes to vaccine manufacturing, because manufacturing is not about production development. It's also you need various samples. You need a poor country who are affected by, or maybe first detect those kind of disease to be able to collaborate with the global health governance system, right? So if they hide the sample, they don't refuse to give it to you. And this is one layer. Another layer is after SARS, at the WHO level, they created something called the internal health regulation, basically ask the country in the world to detect, to report, to respond to the disease, especially infectious disease in their own territory, in their own country. But in practice, 2/3 of the world country don't have this capacity, either infrastructure or technology or know-how. So again, go back to your question. It's not just about vaccines, right? It's about a lot of socio-economic conditions even before that. And again, it's about the fairness at a global level too.
Oh, thank you, Rachel. That was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Fran, for that question. I did see a hand go up at some point. If that was someone who still has a question or something to share, please feel free to just unmute. Yes, go ahead.
Hello, Professor. Nice to meet you. And I want to ask a question: whether regionalization will replace globalization in the future? Because I think that globalization have brought many problems. Maybe the world will find that the cost of globalization is higher than the benefit of globalization in the future. Whether the development of globalization will be replaced by the regionalization in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the question. This is also a very broad question. Again, like even for the so-called the benefit of globalization, I think from the early start, we already know it's not equally distributed, right? But in the past decades, our discourses, our attention has been paid to the benefits of the globalization, right? For example, when it comes to the economic development, like China is an excellent example, is to leave those kind of millions of people out of poverty, right? So it's also viewed as the big winner of globalization. But I think right now we are at the almost fifth grade of contemporary globalization process, and the consequences of unequal development actually become extremely clear in terms of the risk, the vulnerability, and the crisis to come. And also, I think most importantly, in the past, we also always argue for the southern country. The risk is part of their experience with globalization from the very beginning. But what is unusual is right now, because of COVID-19, we know that the North apparently become the victim of globalization too, right? So that is a kind of a pivotal moment when it comes to our wellness, right? And even now, like at the very beginning, like when the vaccine is out, you may heard from the radio, everyone start talking about, the night at the end of the tunnel, right? I was feeling like, well, not yet, right? Because you kind of know, right? But everyone's getting used to that, disaster is exception for us. With the technology, with our massive purchasing power, we're going to quickly move out of that. Right, that is our kind of default thinking in the North. But again, I think your question is very broad. But just like we talk about at this moment, it's more about how we really integrate. First, to develop this sense of interconnectedness, and second of all, to integrate them into our global governance mechanism or thinking. I think this is maybe, something we should really ponder on when it comes to globalization. And also in the past, we did not view as globalization as a site of problems, right? We just talk about global flow of, capitals, informations, and people, and so on. But right now, we kind of say global flow of problems, the risk and everything, right? So hope I answered your question well.
Oh, okay, thank you very much.
Right, and I'm just noticing now somehow the time has flown. We're 3 minutes past our end time. And so I'll just direct everyone here to the chat where Alicia is very kindly posting the seminar schedule. And we will be having more talks on various subjects related to health and aging throughout the academic year. You can see the schedule there, and the next upcoming one will be in partnership with Gilbrea, the Center for Studies in Aging. So please feel free to check out any of those items for your information for future HAS talks. And finally, I'll just once again thank, on behalf of everyone, you, Rachel, for an amazing presentation and a great discussion as well. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending.
Thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate it.